year. As usual, everything is going to be recorded. Okay, so agenda item 1 is apologies for absence. We do have Councillor Scott who's substituting for Councillor Pandor, but have we got any other apologies?
Yeah, sure. We've got apologies from Joanna Wardburn, Councillor Hinchcliffe, and also Councillor Swift, for whom Councillor Scullion is substituting as well.
Thank you. Okay. And move on to agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Anyone got any declarations to declare? No, thank you. And there aren't any matters on the agenda today which would require the exclusion of the public, so we're fine on that one too. So if we could move on to item 4, which is to confirm the minutes of the last meeting, we will have to approve them informally because we're not quorate. We've only got 2 members here. But have any of the members present got any comments on the minutes? No? Yeah, thank you. So can we note that, please? And we'll have to come back to approve those later. Okay, so agenda item 5, it's the internal audit progress report. No decisions to make, but members are asked to consider the contents of the supporting appendix 1, which is detailing the progress against plan. So could I ask, is it Ron, please, to take us through this and highlight anything?
Thank you, Chair. We are definitely at the business end of delivering the 22-23 plan. I have remained optimistic throughout the year that we will have sufficient work done to be able to give an unlimited opinion. That optimism has not changed at this point, despite the fact that we have had some further setbacks in terms of recruitment and losing a couple of members of the team, which, tiny as it is a big loss for us. We have some co-source procurement underway at the moment. We'd already brought a bit of co-source support in to do some PCI card testing for us, which was one of the weaknesses that our ICT audit supplier had identified. So we did that piece of work, but we are also trying to recruit some further co-source support to do some of the main audit plan reviews, particularly around projects and programmes. So that is underway. We are struggling to identify resource there. The firms are all experiencing the same issues that we are. It's not a unique problem to the combined authority. It seems to be something that is prevalent across the audit world at large at the moment. So we are manfully carrying on, and we are trying to think about using our skill sets in the best possible way. So where we managed to recruit some senior auditors, we've got for AEB particularly, we're also using them for some of the plan reviews and moving some resource into AEB from the wider audit team. So it's not perfect, and we need to work really hard to try and sort the recruitment out. We need to also think about the resources more generally. We are seeing an increase in the number of fraud and whistleblowing referrals, so you will note that from the papers, no doubt. That's something that we need to think about in terms of resourcing going forward. Nobody plans for fraud referrals, really, and we'd rather not have them. But at the end of the day, I think having a mayoral combined authority raises the profile sufficiently that we become an organisation that's likely to see an increase in this. So the appendix is, it sets out our progress to this point. It sets out the assurances that we've given to date. We did do a review where we had to give minimal assurance. We had a number of issues around systems and processes in one of our directorates. I can give the committee assurance that the organisation's accepted all the recommendations that we made in regard to that report and is actioning those as we speak. So we intend to come back with some further updates on the actions taken and how that's been progressed. But I am happy to give you that assurance that it is being dealt with the right level of urgency and support. So I think that's, it's not great to give minimal assurance, but it is good that the organisation has picked that up and has dealt with it as it should. For the rest of it, we obviously report to you on AEB. It's a big part of the work that we do. It's separately funded within the team. So we have a number of auditors that are dedicated to looking at the adult education budget. It's a combination of looking at how well the programme is being run and how well the providers are delivering services. And we've got a few reasonable assurance reviews there to feed back on, so that's good news too. And that is progressing quite well. We do have a number of reporting mechanisms around adult education budget, and one of the things that we undertook to do when the adult education budget was devolved to the combined authority was to report back to this committee regularly. So it's important that this committee does see the progress that's being made on AEB and any issues that are arising there, but hopefully you'll feel that's sufficiently covered in the papers. I've mentioned the increase in counter fraud and whistleblowing referrals. They're all currently at investigation stage, one of which is being investigated by one of our partner authorities. So there are 3 that we're dealing with directly. And again, there's nothing at this point that we need to raise with the committee, but we are making sure that we do take all of these allegations seriously and we investigate them properly. We are blessed in the fact that one of our auditors is actually a counter fraud specialist. By chance, not by design. We were very fortunate when we recruited that individual, so we do have the requisite expertise to do the investigations. Grant certification hasn't been overly onerous this quarter, which is always a joy because it does soak up quite a lot of resource. So we've been using that time to press on with the reviews. KPIs are not looking as good as they should do, and we're perfectly frank about that. It's related to the issues I've identified around recruitment and losing some staff, but we are hopefully, at least where we can, have the most positive impact possible. We are doing that. The feedback we get from our audit clients is extremely positive, and they recognise the fact that we do put the effort in to understand the areas that we're going into audit so that we do a thorough job and we know what we're talking about when we speak to them. I won't say anything more, but I'm very happy to take any questions on the progress report.
Thanks, Bron. I think with regards to minimal assurance, I had a long discussion with Bron about that, and I'm quite content really with the action that's being taken. But I think for the purpose of this committee, I think it's really important that we receive sort of reports at the end of these investigations, and the same with the fraud and whistleblowing, just so that we know that it's come to a suitable conclusion and we can challenge if we feel more needs to be done. So I think as long as we keep an eye on that, that's really good. In terms of availability of auditors, I joined the Chair's Regional Forum yesterday, and the entire meeting did nothing but discuss the lack of internal and external auditors nationally and the crisis point that all audit firms are at with this. And it obviously has a knock-on impact then to local central government auditing. So we're certainly not unique in this at all, which is some comfort, I think, really. And I think all we can do is to keep prioritising the work and keep concentrating on areas that really need the expertise, which I know you're doing, so that's good. So have members got any questions on that? Yes, Councillor Scullion.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies for the mask, but I have got a very bad cough and cold, so it's for your protection as a committee. Excuse me. I was really pleased to see in the papers the work that's been done on the adult education budget. It's a big budget, it's a tricky budget, there are lots of suppliers. We need to continue to keep a tight focus. I know that particular piece of work is finished, but given that there's more work coming, I think we do need to keep a tight focus on that. And I would absolutely endorse what the Chair said about the transport budget. You know, the complexity of that and the importance of that in terms of size is really important. I was interested to pick up the use of the Salford IT company for specialist ICT audit, and I think reading through the rest of the papers it's very clear that that continues to be a major risk. Just because it hasn't happened doesn't mean we can't actually keep on top of that, so we mustn't lose sight of that, even if it does mean bringing in additional extra resources. And in terms of recruitment, I mean, we're all struggling in local authorities in terms of everything really, transport planners, planning officers, everybody really. However, it came up yesterday at the Finance and Resources Committee in terms of the efforts that the Combined Authority are making and should be making around the question of growing your own, bringing in apprenticeships. And I know that doesn't necessarily help in the immediate short term, but nonetheless, really, and the plea from yesterday's meeting was really about increasing our efforts as a Combined Authority in relation to that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Scullion. And Councillor Scott.
I just want to echo what Councillor Scullion said, and also the Chair. I think there is an importance about emphasising and growing our own, and due to the budget constraints going forward, it's going to be even tougher. And I'm a little bit worried about the recruitment element of that, because you're going to equally put pressure on the staff, that your existing staff, and it's about that support mechanism. Also about bringing back the results of the investigation. I think that's key, because I think we can learn. It'll be a good pattern to what we can take from it and learn going forward. So all in all, we're happy with the report at Care Please, and I think you're doing a great job under the circumstances.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bron, can you just pick up on that a little bit? Because we did mention a couple of meetings ago that you were working with HR on recruitment. So does that piece of work involve apprenticeships and growing your own?
It does, and we are specifically looking to bring in a counter-fraud apprentice. The awarding bodies have now developed an apprenticeship programme for counter-fraud, so we think that's a really useful way to because that is a specialist area, and actually growing an apprentice from that would be ideal. So that's one we're exploring with HR at the moment. I think your point, Councillor Scott, is absolutely right. It's great to bring apprentices in, but they soak up the resource of an existing team that is stretched. So we have to do that mindfully, I think. So it is one we are thinking about more broadly, but I think we need to get some bodies in to enable us to do that effectively. Yeah, and to be fair to the apprentices, you need them to be coming in a way that allows them to develop into the roles, have the right levels of work and the right levels of support to do it. Personally, I think we are paying the cost of having not invested in trainees and apprentices for the last decade or so. I think we all took our eye off the ball in terms of the future, and because budgets were tight, trainees were seen as a nice to have, not an essential for what we were going to need further down the line. So I think it is something we really do need to think about in our specific circumstances. While I'm happy to press on with the counter-fraud one, I think the audit apprentices is one we're going to have to think about once we've managed to get some more bodies through into the team.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Robinson.
Thanks, Chair. Firstly, apologies for being slightly late. Transport issues, which runs with a nice theme going through this paper as well. It's certainly through the whole of the agenda today, we see transport, skills and staffing, and digital IT or cyber coming through time and time again. The challenge as I see it is that we're talking about apprentices, and I fully agree we need to grow our own, but we're in a situation where we will have a capacity issue. So there's just certain things that we can't do right now, or will have to be put back to later in the forward programme. How are those conversations happening across directorates? And is there a conflict in messaging where we're continuing to push full steam ahead, but we just don't have the people to be able to deliver this stuff, quite frankly?
So we do talk with the directorates about the upcoming pieces of work. We look at whether the scheduling is appropriate, because the pressures are not just with the audit team, they're with the business more widely. So we are very conscious that we don't go in to do a piece of work at the point at which it's least helpful. So those conversations are ongoing. What we try and do out of that is reprioritise constantly. I mean, it's a huge part of the role at the moment, is just looking to ensure that we're doing sufficient, because we don't want to limit an opinion that because we haven't done enough work. At the same time, the work that we do has to cover sufficient breadth to allow us to give that opinion on the overall control framework. So it's a pressure, it's an absolute pressure, and it's one that we have to manage with the business, because going in to audit at a point at which you're actually making their job more difficult is not helpful. And we are here to make sure the organisation delivers its objectives in the best way possible. So it is a constant conversation with the directorates. We try and make sure that where where there are issues, that we plan in something else that is actually a little bit more doable at that point. But it still remains within the scope of the plan. And as you know, we bring any changes to the plan back here. We've not made any for this meeting. So we are hopeful we will get to the end of it all. We do have a rolling programme of contract management and programme assurance pieces, and those are the ones that are kind of our fallback position. And that's helpful because you can prioritise the riskiest of the programmes, projects and contracts in order to get that kind of coverage to the level that you want. But yeah, it's an ongoing issue.
Thank you. Any other questions on that? No. Okay, lovely, thank you. So just before we move on to agenda item 6, can we just go back to the minutes of the meeting? Now we've got sufficient people here to approve them. So,
Sorry, do we need 4?
4. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, brilliant.
Yeah. Okay. So can I just ask if all committee members approve the minutes of the last meeting? Lovely. Thank you very much. Okay. So we'll move on to agenda item 6, which is the internal audit draft plan. Sorry.
Can I just apologise on really struggling with back to this? I need to sit down and stand up.
Yes. Yes. No problem at all. Yes, of course.
Don't be put off by me doing it.
Bit of yoga in the back, Craig.
Okay, so the draft internal audit plan for 23-24 was in Appendix 1, and it's been brought to the committee just slightly early so that we can comment before it's discussed in more detail with directors. So, Bron, I think it's you again on this one, isn't it, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so we are a little bit previous with this. We normally bring the draft to the March committee, but we have a number of organisational changes. We're going through some interim structures between now and March. So actually it's helpful, I think, for us to start the conversation sooner to make sure that the committee's got an opportunity to comment on areas they believe we should consider but haven't considered yet. That then helps us have the conversations with the business. So it's really for the committee to identify if there is anything they feel strongly we need to be adding to the proposed plan that we've got in the paper. As with previous years, we look externally for what's being reported across the wider audit world. We look at the horizon scanning from the risk in focus review that's done by the internal audit professional body. That is a really interesting piece of work this year, and if you've had time to look at that appendix, you'll see it marries up very closely with the risks that we've identified for the organisation. And it's quite clear that the struggles that people are experiencing in terms of the emerging risks are fairly standard across most organisations. So we took some confidence when we looked at that and looked at what our internal reviews had identified, that we are on the right track and we are probably getting the right things on the plan at this point. It's not perfect at this stage because we do need the conversations with the directorates, and that will be evolving over the next quarter. When we bring the plan back to March, that will have included the discussions with the various directors and their heads of service to make sure the plan is really as risk focused as it can possibly be. I'll leave it at that. I know there was a lot of information in there, and I expect that it would have taken a bit of ploughing through. But the correlation between the work that we did and the business plan that's at Appendix 3 married up very well with the external horizon scanning. So I took confidence from that. I hope the committee will as well.
Thanks, Bron. I was really pleased to see that you've got the assurance map and accountability structure mapping that's going to happen, because I think that will be a really useful tool for this committee once it's done. So that's good news. Any question from members on this or comments? No? Can I just ask, Bron, I couldn't see anything in there. We mentioned adult education before. I couldn't see anything in there for that.
It's reviews around the adult education budget programme. So we actually do reviews of how they are delivering the programme, and then the provider reviews, which is, again, a rolling programme of providers. So it should be there, number 14 and 15.
Thank you. Okay, and then my only other query really was around the risk in focus report, which is a good report, but it's standard and it's cumulative view of what's happening across everywhere, isn't it? So I suppose my thoughts were, how are you making sure that any risks that are really unique to the authority are addressed, rather than sort of relying on what it's saying in the risk and focus report?
So that's the piece of work we do, looking at the business plans, which we put in at Appendix 3. Was a useful document, I think, as a summary of what people are planning for next year. We looked at that as part of the work. We looked at the work that we'd done previously, so where we thought there were risks, and we always reference back to the corporate risk register and individual directorate risk registers. So we take the kind of risk-based planning aspect of this really seriously, because at the end of the day, we don't have time to look at everything. We have got to prioritise the riskiest areas. So hopefully that's been comprehensive in the sense of all the available risk information factors in. Does not stop things changing during the course of the year, and does not stop the need to continuously keep that under review, which we do. And as you know, we bring that back to this committee where we need to. So hopefully that gives you confidence that we have looked at all of those.
Thank you. Okay, so any further comments? Yes.
Thanks, Chair. Appendix 1, the draft internal audit plan. Is that the hierarchy, where the way they're ranked there?
I think you asked this question last year as well, Councillor Robinson.
If it's a good question, you just
It is a good question. No, and the answer is no, it's not. And because of the things we've already discussed, we do constantly have to prioritise the timetabling of work. And that is a moving feast throughout the course of the year for all the issues we've already covered. So it's not done in order of priority at all. It is merely trying to capture the right scope and breadth of work.
Yeah, I just think it shows the sheer scope and scale of the job that you've got to do, which I don't envy, if I'm honest with you, Ron. If I pick one out, though, we talk about cybersecurity, ICT. I think some of that is affected by the external factors, international. So what we've seen, the invasion of Ukraine, the instability that's gone on there, the cyber attacks that have come from Russia and the East, have meant that businesses have had to adapt their model. At the same time, this combined authority is growing and doing more work with our partners. And if our partners aren't keeping up with cybersecurity and IT, that puts us at risk as well. And so how are we mapping this with what they're doing?
So we do meet with the other heads of audit around the combined authorities. Everybody has a concern about cybersecurity. It is something that everybody is keen to look at. We also, through the work that Salford does for us, Salford have obviously a number of contracts across the region. They kind of take a more holistic view of cybersecurity generally, and they're quite sort of on the front foot of what's going on in the local authority world more generally, which is helpful to us. I think if we had that in-house resource, we wouldn't kind of get that bigger picture view. So having them as a co-source partner is extremely helpful. But I would honestly say I don't think there is a single local authority that does not prioritise this as an area for review. Whether they do it in-house or whether they buy it in, depends on their own arrangements, but it's something that I think I can confidently say we are all considering. It is an interesting point, though, in terms of considering it in relation to how we impact on each other, and that is something that I'll pick up with Salford, have a conversation about how we might think about doing that.
I think one weak link in the chain when it comes to ransomware, or particularly as the appendix has highlighted, killware, which is increasingly growing in its prevalence, and those who utilise this are seeking to disrupt. They're not seeking to make money out of it. They're seeking to utterly disrupt the system that's there, and they don't care about it. And so one weak link, one weak partner puts this authority vulnerable, and that goes for our local authority colleagues as well, health colleagues and everybody. So it's not something I expect Ron to comment on, but I think it's helpful that we're mindful of it and benchmarking ourselves with our peers as well.
I agree. I just wonder if it's worth, can you just bring us back any findings you've had, and that's the next one, just update us a little bit, because I think it really is a valid point. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so if there are no further comments, can we move on to agenda item 7, which is the update on the external report and maths since the last meeting. So, Mark, are you? Yep, yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. So this is your regular report on external audit. So paragraph 2.1, we have had confirmation from Public Sector Appointments Limited that Mazars are reappointed for the next period, which I hope we are all pleased with. I think he does appear to be happy. We have had a good working relationship with Mazars, as the committee's aware, so I think that's helpful. So that arrangement will continue through for 5 years, through to 2027-28. However, we are still concluding prior year sets of audits. So 2021 was approved, you signed that off way back when. The whole of government accounts has delayed being able to formally do the sign-off. We are now there with that because finally we've been told that we're below the threshold. So we are able to formally conclude that audit. So that's a helpful step forward. The 2021-22 audit, you'll all be aware, we had an agreed delayed start to that audit work for a variety of reasons that we explored in the summer. That work is well underway now. We are hoping to bring the accounts back to the March meeting for approval, and Mark has provided an update and may be able to expand on that as part of this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Do you want to pick up on that?
I will indeed, yeah. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Angela. I will, if I'm honest, take the report as read. I think Angela's covered the vast majority of it. I think perhaps just to add that we are on track to bring our audit completion report to the next Governance and Audit Committee meeting. So I think there's some good news there. Other bits of the report that I'd pick up on, if I may, draw your attention to page 110 of your pack. And just to highlight that, CITFA published yesterday detailed guidance notes which provide a temporary solution to the sector-wide issue around accounting for infrastructure assets. Really good news for the sector, really good news for the Combined Authority, and good news for us as auditors. We will work with management now to understand the impact on WICA's accounts. We'll build that into the work that's ongoing on the wider financial statements, and as I say, ready to report the findings to the next Governance and Audit Committee meeting. The other bit that I'd draw to your attention that links nicely to Angela's introduction is on page 117 of your packs, and that's the FRC's recent review of audit quality. Just to say that Mazars performed really strongly, both individually and in comparison to audit suppliers. Really good news for us, obviously, as audit suppliers, but I think also good news for the Combined Authority and this committee, linked to the fact that you continue to have Mazars as your external auditors for the next 5 years. I think that provides you with some really useful assurance that our key regulator, the FRC, sees us delivering quality audits. I'll stop there, Chair, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Scullion.
Thank you. I'm tempted to ask if one of the equalities criteria was people called Mark working for the organisation. But I won't. It was something that occurred to me as I was looking. I'm very pleased that we got a clean bill of health. But as combined authorities and mayoral combined authorities mature, whether there is something equivalent to what we have in the district councils of a SIPFA family, of where are the comparators? Yes, we've got a clean sheet and a good opinion, but actually we do need to, even though we're all different and there are differences, whether there are thoughts in the audit world about ways in which we have a core set of things that we are measured against in terms of audit. I didn't express that very clearly, but you understand what I mean in terms of what local authorities do.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I'm not sure I can answer it fully, but certainly one perhaps for us to go away and think about, and management as well. So my very simple answer to that is, I'm actually the appointed auditor for Greater Manchester Combined Authority also, so there are some useful crossovers there. Within Mazars, we also audit a number of other combined authorities, and would you believe, as appointed auditors and auditors more generally, we do talk to each other around audit approach, around what the different combined authorities are doing or are not doing, where there are in terms of the governance structures, and our value for money work is really helpful as we seek to do that. So if you put yourself in my position, how do I know whether you're good, bad or indifferent? A really helpful way is to compare you internally to other combined authorities, and we do that. So I hope that provides you with some assurance. I think there's a bigger question actually, which I'm not sure I'm well placed to answer, is there scope for new style combined authorities to be working closely together? I know some of that already happens, but how formal it is, I'm really not sure, and perhaps Angela's better placed to pick that up.
And so combined authority finance directors meet on a regular basis. One of the topics we do talk about is audit. It does tend to focus primarily on the, I'll put it nicely, how promptly the accounts are being audited, how well that is, but it tends to be a bit of a sharing of experience rather than a more formal consideration of actually is there something that could be learned. I know we've been talking with Local Government Association who are thinking about how do we bring together some of these groupings, particularly now combined authorities are getting bigger. And we have previously had representation, for example, from SIPFA on some of the formal meetings of the Combined Authority FD. So I think I'll take this away and feed that back into those conversations, because I think it's certainly merit in Councillor Scullion's point of sharing knowledge and experience, not in and not just in an anecdotal way, but actually in a way to understand the shared issues. How can we help ensure, are the risks the same? Are there things we can learn from each other? So I'll take that away and bring an update back to the committee through one of the papers in future.
Thank you, I think that'd be really helpful. Any other questions? No, thank you. We'll move on to agenda item 8 then, which is the Treasury Management Strategy, and this is to endorse the strategy prior to consideration by the Combined Authority. I think it's very clear, but Angela, did you want to introduce this?
Thank you. Yes, it's very similar to the approach taken in previous years. If that has stood as well, there's no reason to change it particularly. What we also use this paper as an opportunity to flag any issues on Treasury management. As it says in the paper, there aren't any. We're actually just going into the current quarterly meetings next week on Treasury management with the partners who support us on this. So I will advise if there is anything of concern, but we don't expect there to be. We did flag, I think, in the sort of training session we did earlier in the year that there are some significant changes coming through the SIPFA codes of practice. So we've reflected in the Treasury strategy statement any new requirements. We were already in good practice. We were already following most of those anyway. But one of the areas is around the potential indicators, and we've talked before about being able to bring something back to this committee that felt accessible and useful for you to monitor and be able to help better understand where the Treasury management is performing. So we are working through the changes required to potential indicators effective from April 23, but we'll develop those up and bring those back to you to see. It does set out in the paper a little bit what they are, but it's probably going to be more helpful to bring the suite of indicators to you and talk through what they're telling you and make sure you all feel comfortable that that is giving you improved information about how our Treasury management is performing. In interest, one of the new PIs is around non-Treasury investments, and I think that's a reflection of some of the activities that have taken place where there have been investments for more commercial purposes that have caused difficulties in certain local authorities and certain parts of local government. So I think that's a strengthening to ensure that members are fully cited on that. Just for information, our only non-Treasury investment, we've deemed the SME Investment Fund as part of that. I think we've always been very clear in this forum that Treasury management is about managing the cash we have. It's not about project decisions and spending our money on projects. The BAF, it's not its formal name now, the SME Foresight Investment Fund, is a slightly different departure, but that has had full approval at Combined Authority, recognising it's using some funding we have. It isn't technically, it isn't about treasury management, but for reassurance, I said at the beginning, I'll close with it, our approach remains the same to protecting the cash that we have, which is in our bank accounts for timing purposes. It's managing the cash coming in ahead of us needing to pay it out to suppliers, partners, contractors, etc. But happy to take any questions. It does form part of the budget pack for the Combined Authority on the 2nd of February. So happy to take any comments now, or if anything comes to mind between now and 2 weeks when we publish papers, please come back to me.
Thank you. Any questions?
I'll just comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that, Angela. A detailed, a draft detailed report. I just want a comment to make that it's about the challenges that we have at present and the financial uncertainty. That is worrying, and it's about how we best manage it. And I think what you've done is pretty straightforward. So thank you.
Thank you. Can I just ask, Anna, a quick one? You say that you may be using some funds rather than investing them. You may use them for capital works. So what sort of checks and balances are there that we don't tie money up that we will later need?
And I think that is the thinking behind that PI. So at the moment there are no plans to do anything. Treasury management is treasury management and stands alone. If there are any decisions to use funding, and it's a slightly grey area whether the SME investment fund is actually just a project where we're investing funds. We are expecting to return that money, so we have classified it as a non-treasury investment. But if there were plans to do anything else, it would go through the full Combined Authority for approval. There aren't at this stage, but in the difficult world we inhabit, we are obviously looking at whether there are different operating models out there, whether there are different opportunities that we could pick up to try and, as Councillor Scott said, how do we make our money go further, but in a controlled and managed way. And there is nothing in any delegations or decisions that allows us to do anything at officer level without bringing it back for member approval.
Thank you. And then just one other question, really, just curiosity. We've got a very good relationship with Leeds, obviously, and you've obviously talked to them a lot. There's regular dialogue there, as I can see. But do we ever actually check that they are adhering to our principles on how we want things investing and things like that?
Their internal audit function most years do a piece of work for us that is shared with myself and with our head of internal audit, and that confirms that they are, and it always has done. We've never had anything other than a whatever their definition is of reasonable, but it's had a green audit each year that they've looked at that. So they do check that they're adhering to the detail of the service level agreement. In our regular quarterly meetings, we also review what they have done in the period. I have reported to the committee on odd occasion where there has been something, where there's been a timing issue or a funding placed as it hasn't been processed for a day and we've been in breach of something. They're very good at alerting us, and I've shared that back with the committee. So I think we're quite comfortable there is an audit trail and of assurance that they are adhering to our requirements. But we'll make sure we bring that out as part of the future reporting, because it's a good point.
Yeah, that'd be really useful. Thank you. Okay, then no other questions? No, thank you. We'll move on to agenda item 9, and that's to consider any changes to the arrangements for internal control since the last meeting. And I think also this is inflationary pressures as well. It touches on again, doesn't it? So Angela, I think it's for you again.
Thank you. I'll go through each section briefly and then pause at the end for questions. So I stated that there are no significant changes to internal controls. I've just recognised we have changed the sub-delegation scheme, reflecting some of the organisational change that was approved at the end of last year. But that doesn't directly affect internal controls, but it felt the right thing to report back to you. Our new integrated finance HR payroll system is in the final stages of testing, is due to go live on a date yet to be confirmed, but shortly. And certainly the control environment is something that I've been focusing on in that work, and Head of Internal Audit is on the project board providing an assurance role, and she's also has a laser focus on control. So I think reassurance that there clearly will be changes to the way things happen. It's a new finance system, but we are very mindful of ensuring that control environment is suitable. Nothing to report from Regulatory and Compliance Board. The key indicators you've asked to see previously, they're all up to date. We've had no further RIDDOR reports for some time now, which is good news. And there's a brief update on the finances, which are going pretty much to every committee meeting at the moment, it being the heart of budget time. So flagging the inflationary challenges we have, and the in-year position looks okay. We've had staff vacancies which are outweighing some of the increasing costs across the organisation. We've had some additional investment income coming through because of the increase in interest rates is bad for spending our money, but in terms of investing it is clearly beneficial. But we are looking to ring fence that to support the capital programme, because those cash balances and that interest rate will not stay at those levels on a sustainable basis. We are hoping to take a draft budget to the Combined Authority in February, which will present a balanced budget for next year. It will use some non-recurring savings on concessionary travel to fund expected increases in bus-tended services, but there are challenges for the future years, and it will very much be a one-year budget with work required around bus-tended services in particular. But I think we'll also take the opportunity of the new organisational structure, the new focus on outcomes for directorates. We're realigning the budgets behind each of those directorates. The new post of Chief Operating Officer. I think as part of all of that, we will be doing a bit more of an in-depth review of budgets in year, looking to identify savings plans and options, because there's a very strong chance we will be sat in the budget meetings in autumn still facing challenges for future years, and we can't wait until then. So on the plus side, we hope to set the budget. On the downside, it isn't a balanced 3-year position, but I don't think that will be a surprise to anyone who's involved in the budget conversations with their own local authorities. And there are some severe challenges for our local authority partners. There's a brief update there on the capital expenditure, which is a little below where it might be, but we do get a real spurt in spend towards the end of the year, and we're revising the forecasts to put in the budget paper, and putting some challenge out there to ourselves and our partners to ensure we've got robust estimates that will enable us then to manage the cash to best effect. But we'll continue to monitor against it as we do at the moment, and continue to bring it through to you. Nothing else to flag, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Yeah, Councillor Robinson.
For a few years ago, when you used to have stability and low interest rates, Angela. It's going to keep being interesting, this. On the capital programme, the Brownfield Housing Fund there, its percentage in your forecast is 0.5%. And I know we had some tight deadlines for turning that around. So I guess the first question is, what steps have been taken and interventions on that to try and move it forward? The second would be around a question more generally around the capital programme and the finances. Really often I hear when we get to combined authority meetings, it's, well, we put it later in the programme. So when does something not put later in the programme and it's cancelled instead? Because it'll just be too exorbitant, the costs, to be able to deliver it. But really often I hear from directors and officers and others, we've put it forward 2 years' time. So when does that point kick in?
I'll work backwards through those, and I may defer to Melanie, who in Melanie's former role, I think she was probably very able to give us an update on brownfield housing. I think on the capital project, anything cancelled would be advised back to members. There's not many schemes are cancelled. I think officers often work to find a way to deliver it, whether it's rescoping, whether it's phasing it. But I'm trying to think in memory, but very little has actually been stopped in its tracks. There clearly was the paper looking at inflation that paused projects, and who knows, as you say, over the next few years, as people look at those projects, will there be have to be rescoped to be deliverable and affordable. We don't know, but that there would not be an officer decision to take any projects out of the programme or to cancel them. That would come back to members.
Just on that before.
But I'd be.
Rather jumping to on brownfield, I want to comment on further as well. I think because the combined authority is moving to an outcomes basis as well, that question is going to have to be answered or considered again in the future. There's with inflation costs going up, what we can deliver for that budget that we set a few years ago is not going to be what we projected, and whether we stop it in its tracks and say we just can't do it, or we have to say we're going to have to rephase it and do it in a different way. I think it's not, I know it's not for Angela or Melanie to comment today, but it's probably something for the combined authority to consider as well.
Thank you, Melanie. Do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. On the Brownfield Housing Fund, there have been a number of approvals that have come through the committees this year, and there will be spend in Q4. This is up to Q2, so I think there is already spend for Q3 as well, but there will be significant spend in Q4. We've got a revised position at September that was still forecasting the 29 million. I don't think it's going to be as high as that, given the latest forecast that I've seen. And one of the issues, I guess, across all of the programmes is that because the costs are going up, we are asking individual projects and programmes to value engineer. So the first thing that they need to do is look again at the costs, and do we really need all those elements in? Do we have to change the scope? So it has meant that there is a bit less spend than was being predicted in September, because we are looking again at the figures. But that's the right thing to do to make sure that we are still delivering schemes that are value for money. You're right, ultimately, we know that inflation is now starting to, it will tail off from 24, hopefully next year. But if that does start to tail off, hopefully we'll start to get more certainty in terms of what we're putting forward. But there could be some schemes where at that point they are no longer affordable, and that conversation will need to be had at that point. But in terms of moving things forward in the individual programmes, it depends on the length of the programme and the requirements of the fund. So, for example, Brownfield Housing Fund, we've been told there is no extension to the delivery of that programme. And actually, if projects don't deliver by a certain time, they'll be timed out of the programme, in a similar way to how we manage Growth Deal. So we over-programmed, and it was a set time scale, and if you haven't started or contractually committed that project at that point, that is one of the casualties. But it may be that if it's a real strategic priority for us, we look to see if there are other funding sources that we can identify. But some programmes are time limited. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Can I just ask, one observation really, I think, is the table and the data that we've got in this report for capital programmes, and it's only up to Q2. Is there any way we can get a more up-to-date picture of this? Because it's quite a way on from there, isn't it now?
Yeah. Can I come back in, Chair? The grant claims are done after the end of the quarter. They're actually due in tomorrow for Q3. So we can't give you the actuals for Q3 until we've processed those. So we're probably a month away from having the Q3 figures. And then similarly, after the year end, we will then get the Q4 claims and the figures for Q4. We can give revised forecasts, but at the moment, a lot of the projects will still be forecasting full spend, and then we'll get as close as they can to that forecast at year end. So next time round, we can look at giving you an update on Q3, but unfortunately, there is a time lag because of the claims process.
Okay, thank you. I'm just aware that in terms of offering any real challenge, unless we've got the figures, it's very hard to do that, isn't it? So, yeah, if you can give that some thought, that'd be much appreciated. The only other thing I was wondering is in terms of the contracts. You mentioned that there's quite a few contracts that are due to be renewed by the amount of inflation, or reviewed in terms of cost by the amount of inflation. How confident are you that those have all been identified and you understand the financial impact that will have collectively?
That was part of our budget process, where each budget holder controller was asked to identify where there was a particular contract with inflation attached, because some are, and this crosses both capital and revenue, because there's obviously ICT contracts a good example. Many of those have an RPI annual increase built in each year. Depending when that falls, it's having quite a significant impact because, as Melanie said before, inflation will drop down. And depending on when the anniversary date falls, we may be hit with a significant figure this year, but next year, because inflation's a year-on-year comparator, it will fall away. So we hope we've captured all the contract, and our commercial team are looking at it from a contract management perspective across the organisation, but individual budget holders have been required to provide updates, whether it be the energy contracts they look after, whether it's ICT contract, whether it's repairs at bus stations. So we've captured it. The challenge is whether our estimates are correct or not. The biggest one actually is probably not contracts but pay, and we've followed 4%, which is what local authorities have done, but I don't think anybody here would have confidence in what I think next year's pay award is likely to be. So we carry risks up and down on inflation. I think it puts pressure on us monitoring as carefully as we can on it, and make sure we're monitoring how the assumptions shift and what the real impact is. The bus tendered services is the biggest one where we have allowed for significant inflation to continue, which is partly it's not driven by RPI, it's driven by other factors, primarily fuel and labour, and scarcity of providers out there. So it's a complicated world, and there'll be more coming back to the Combined Authority on how we intend to approach bus tendered services in the future year. It's a difficult time.
Thank you. Okay. Any other questions on that? No. Okay. Move on to agenda item 10, which is an update on corporate planning and performance. I think this is James presenting this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Pleased to meet you all today. This is the first time I've been to this committee. So, as is probably self-evident, the report provides an update on the corporate risk management strategy. The principal message for the committee is that the strategy for managing risk is evolving as the organisation evolves. We've heard already about the shift to an outcome-led operating model and organisational structure, and business plans for 2023-24 are being prepared in that vein as well, to be much more outcome-led. So this means that the approach to risk management will evolve to revolve even more around, even more than previously, around the risk to delivery of those outcomes set out in the business plan. So therefore, work is underway as we speak to ensure that the new business plan year commences with an updated and realigned and outcome delivery focused approach to corporate risk management. You'll see in the pack appended to the report is the corporate risk register as of December 2022. This is still in the old organisational structure with some of the risk owners will need to change as well. And the very high risks in there have a series of unsurprisingly common causes to you, I suspect, namely the changes in society post-COVID-19 pandemic, the inflationary pressures that we've already talked about, the tight public fiscal environment, labour market shortages, and the ongoing and urgent need to address the climate emergency. So that's what I wanted to say by way of an introduction, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions on that? Yeah, Councillor Robinson.
Be remiss of me to not wonder. I was having a look at the register at the end there, James, and there's some of them that are, I suppose, really concerning. So some of the particularly around climate change and 2038 target, it would suggest that we're not going to hit it looking at the risk register here, those numbers, and that is it's going to be difficult, and with time marching on, catching up to be able to hit it, particularly with high inflation, with difficulties in terms of staffing, it's going to be really, really difficult to do. How's that been reflected to the directorates as to, do we need to revise that target to go out further? Do we need to start making some of that steps and intervention now to do things differently? Similarly, there's one that's in there, I think it's safety and security, which is it's only high risk, not very high risk. So that's maybe less worrying on that one, which is talking about the high volume of people and the risks presented if there was a major incident. Given that the combined authority is looking at a mass transit system, potentially bus franchising in the future, we'll have far more assets, but far more risk coming into the combined authority. How do you go about assessing that? Because that can be a bit an exercise in crystal ball gazing, I guess, at the moment as well.
Thank you for those questions. I'm good. Excellent. I'm glad the focus is on my socks rather than what I'm about to say. So I'll attempt to answer those questions. I mean, the first one, the environmental one, I think arguably the rating for that is probably a little bit low. Hence why I think we need to, in the revised approach to risk management around can we deliver the outcome, the net zero outcome, I suspect will need to change. I'm afraid I don't have an answer for you now as to how as an organisation we can, the business plans and our approach to delivery of net zero needs to change. That's not an item for Melanie might want to comment on. Do you want to come in now on that?
No, you go for the
Carry
second
on.
bit, yeah.
On safety and security, again, a very good point. But the mass transit programme, as you're probably familiar, is tooling up in terms of people and resources, and it has its very own, or is developing its very own comprehensive risk register and risk management strategy. So that will ultimately feed into the corporate risk management strategy. So can I go away and sort of reflect on your question and come back with perhaps a better answer?
Did you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. On the environmental risks, when we reviewed the capital programmes in the light of the inflation increases, the three criteria that we used were affordability, deliverability and strategic fit. And when we looked at the strategic fit, we were looking at schemes that were more sustainable and that were prioritising more sustainable methods of travel and transport. So a number of the schemes that we prioritised for early delivery with the funding that we had were higher scoring in terms of the strategic fit. So we have tried to slightly change the direction of the programmes that are running by looking more at sustainable travel. So prioritising bus interventions, rail, active travel, and obviously there's the mass transit spend and the work that's been done on that as well. So we are trying to make those changes to make sure that this risk doesn't materialise. It is still a risk. We're not saying it's become an issue, but on the for the climate committee, we're also setting out the phase 1 plan that will put the building blocks in place to enable some of these activities to take place to meet the net zero priorities. So we've got things in place. I think it's too early to say whether or not we're going to meet it, but maybe that's a challenge that we take back to the Climate and Environment Committee so that we can get an update through that committee.
I think that would be a good idea to take it to them. I think, it's when does a risk become an issue? Maybe that's semantics, I don't know. But if it's going to be 2038 and we can get to that, great. If it's actually more likely to be 2040, good to know. So, it's a risk that we're not going to hit 2038, but we're on track to 2045. And at the moment, the way the risk register works, and there's no criticism of James or any of the officers there, it just says whether you are or aren't on track. It doesn't say where that might be, and it could be revised. So if it goes to the Environment Committee, great.
Any questions from anybody else? No. Can I just follow up on that then? I was going to actually suggest that we have something brought back to the committee next time around the environmental risks and the work being done. If I read the report correctly, it says we're not really aware of the full scale of the risk, and that concerns me a bit.
Yeah.
So the work that's being done around that, I think it would be useful to have a look at. Sort of related, again, going back to the transport thing, I was quite surprised that the long-term impact of COVID on travel habits was only put as a likelihood of 3, because from what I can understand, it is having quite an impact now. Is that right?
It's an interesting question. How much is, whether it's directly attributable to COVID now, or whether we're now living. It's the phrase everyone had wasn't the new normal.
Yeah.
Because you're right, patronage has been affected. People's working patterns and travel patterns are different to what they were before. I think it's probably it's back to, I think, the point before, where it's more an issue rather than the risk is almost past. It is an issue. It is what we are having to deal with now. So it may be the explanation of the risk, the outcome, the effect is the same. There are fewer people travelling. How do we encourage more travel? How do we make it sustainable? Is the issue we need to face. So we'll have a look at the wording of that and make it clearer next time.
Thank you, yes. And the other one I picked up was a lack of progress in agreeing sign-off of funding agreements. I was quite concerned about that because it sounded a bit like a control failure as much as anything, process failure. Is that right? Can you just explain a bit behind that?
I'll start. It's something Melanie and I are both very familiar with. It's the funding agreements with the partners and others who are delivering on the capital projects. It appears to take longer than it should do to get through the system. I mean, we have a standard approach to it. We don't pay out the money till the funding agreement's in place, and it is just to protect all parties in this, that if the money isn't spent for the purposes for which it's intended, then the money returns back to us. The reality is that I don't think it's ever really happened. Everyone is aware of it, but it feels the process that it takes just to go through the process, different authorities in different ways, and they can often get delayed for a clause somewhere that is a condition that's put in. It is something we're looking to try and standardise and streamline, so because it shouldn't be an issue. It is there as a backstop, and we'd hope never to get to the point of wrangling over contracts, particularly with partners. We would sort problems if there were any, well in advance of having to resort to the small print of a legal contract. Melanie may have something to add.
Yes, thank you. If you could have a look at that, because these things are always there for that point when things go wrong, aren't they? So, yeah. Yes, certainly. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. If I could just add, we talked about skill shortages around audit. We've got skill shortages in a number of areas, and legal is another one of them, for us and for our partner councils. And we do have a backlog in terms of the funding agreements, and we need to look at whether the processes are still fit for purpose, given that we've all got vacancies and we're carrying vacancies. So that is something we'll look at and we'll come back on.
Yeah. Lovely, thank you. Okay, so if no further questions or comments on that, we'll move on to the final agenda item, which is agenda item 11, and that's to receive the progress report on the annual review of the Leeds City Council framework. So,
That's great.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions or comments? Go
Thanks, Craig. Appendix 4 governance arrangements. City of York are on there. Devolution deal has now been signed, in the process of being signed. Not that I want to kick City of York off the combined authority, but how is that process going to work in terms of them filtering off this combined authority and the work that they do with their own combined authority, and how does that get updated within the assurance framework as well?
Do you want to go?
Yeah, that's fine. I'll answer that one. It depends how the funding programme was set up, and the West Yorkshire plus York Transport Fund is a long-term programme that was set up with York as a partner, and that will continue. We currently also run the York and North Yorkshire TCF programme, because originally it was a Lead City Region TCF programme. So we continue to run that. Now, that may well transition across because it's a discrete element that's York and North Yorkshire. But certainly the Transport Fund, the partnership with York will continue. I don't see that changing. I mean, okay, never say never. But at the moment, it's a long-term programme and they're one of our partners.
If you talked about this being easier for a layperson. If you were a layperson trying to look at this and understand it, we wouldn't. I'm involved in it and I struggle to understand it. So it is difficult. And where some of those funding pots, I appreciate the long-term funding pots. That makes a lot of sense. That has to be reflected within insurance frameworks, governance risk registers, everything else that goes on there. But York are going to have a foot in both camps here, and we need to work out how that's going to operate going forward.
Switch my microphone on, didn't I? But in such a small room, I don't think it matters too much. It's something we'll look at, actually try and simplify it to make it. We did talk about the layperson's language, and we'll try and look at that as well. I think an example of it is because it's mostly transport that we fund York for, and they do sit on transport committee. But as far as I understand, they don't have voting rights on the committee, so they're involved, but they get voting rights. So it is very much West Yorkshire. The approvals come through West Yorkshire rather than the Leeds City region.
On that, Craig, does the nature of transport and the conversations that we're having, whether it's mass transit, whether it's high-speed rail, whether it's Northern Powerhouse Rail, are we being able to be reflected on their own transport committees as well in the same way? Who knows how that's going to work going forward? Because if it's purely based on funding, that which it feels like it is, then fair enough. But the dialogue, the nature of the conversation means, and it sounds like I'm having a pop at York. I went to York University. I'm not. I'm really not. I like York a lot, but they're going to have a foot in both camps. They're going to get to have a voice here, even maybe not voting right, but a voice on both of these, and how that conversation is reflected going forward. I suppose we talked about the maturity of combined authorities as well. You know, some of this I guess will come out in the wash, but it's going to mean your assurance framework is going to need updating all the time as well, I guess, Craig.
Thank you. Any other comments or queries on that? No, I found a typo, so I can come back to you on that when I was reading. Shows what detail I looked at, didn't it? And so, I think a couple of the links aren't working as well, but I'll email you and then.
Is that in the actual document?
Yes.
Right. That's one thing that we're currently checking at the moment.
Oh right, okay, that's fine.
Sorry, the thing I forgot to mention is this will go to the Combined Authority on the 2nd of February. This will go to the Combined Authority on the 2nd of February for their approval. I don't think we'll still have the guidance through, so I think it'll end up getting delegated to the chairs of LEP and Combined Authority and the Chief Exec. And we'll see where it goes to.
Thank you. Okay, I think that brings us to the end of the meeting. So thank you everybody for attending.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.